So I feel like I need to address something I said in my last video. I noticed in the comments there was a lot of responses. Some of them sounded triggered, and some of you just earnestly wanted to understand what I was talking about when I said that everything that happens in your life is your fault. There were comments of people saying things like, "How dare you say my child abuse is my fault," and things along those lines. There are many nuances with this topic, but I'm going to try to be as thorough as I can in this short video. But bear with me until the end and understand that the truth that everything is your fault isn't damaging when it's truly understood on a deep level. It's actually very liberating. So I need to address this from two different levels, because a lot of times in my chats, I'm sort of jumping back and forth between these two different levels. And I believe that it's important to honor both of them. And those two levels are the level of your humanity and the level of your divinity. And I will say that most people on the planet right now have a very shallow understanding of the divinity aspect. I oftentimes say that religion is like training wheels for your divinity, or training wheels for spirituality. And that's not to offend anybody. I actually have a reverence for religion because I had a very dense Christian upbringing. And if it wasn't for that foundation, then I wouldn't have been able to later grasp and understand higher truths. As a matter of fact, I find myself very often going back to biblical texts and things and seeing it through this different lens, and it's actually very helpful. But regardless of what religion you are, or if you are religious at all, it doesn't matter. There's actually bits and pieces of truth within every single religion. So the first level, the human level, I need to address, because yes, strictly on the human level, the things, the traumas, the hardships that happen in your life are oftentimes not your fault. But this is where we need to take radical responsibility of our perspective and radical responsibility of the meaning that we put behind it. So a great example would be when people were being shipped off to Vietnam. They noticed that a handful of people would come back with PTSD, and quite a few would come back and they didn't have PTSD, and they couldn't really quantify why that was. And they later found that it wasn't the actual horrible things that were happening in the midst of the war that messed these guys up. It was after the fact, the constant mental perpetuation, the stories they kept telling themselves of how awful the world is, and a majority of the damage happened later over time by being in this mental loop. So when you realize that you can take radical responsibility for your perspective and the story behind what happened to you, there's a certain level of power there. And I mentioned this book in the last video, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. He was in a concentration camp during the Holocaust, a great book to read to help you wrap your mind around the understanding of cultivating that space between stimulus and response, where instead of just reacting the moment that you have a tough emotion, there's this space, and you realize that you don't have to identify with a thought or emotion, and you can choose what you give your energy to. And that, on the human level, is where your power is. Another element that kind of bridges the gap between the human and the divinity is the concept of just holding on to resentment or choosing to forgive. When you go through traumas, where you go through a lot of darkness, people wronged you, nothing will destroy your life and stagnate your progress faster than resentment. If you can understand that every human being on this planet is unconsciously moving from that place of their past wounds and traumas, and everybody is doing the best they can with the level of consciousness that they're currently at, it makes it easier to forgive, to let it go. And then when you truly forgive, then you're actually freeing yourself at that point. I often talk to my clients about the 3 levels of transcendence. We start out in victimhood, and then we go to empowerment. And then the third stage is when we start to transcend. But that doesn't happen on accident. We usually have to be earnestly seeking to get to that point. So now I'm going to speak on the level of divinity. And this is where I'll probably lose subscribers, which is totally fine. But just know, when you get to this understanding, and it isn't just a concept in your head, but it's something that you have a knowing from some kind of experience, it is the most liberating thing that you'll ever come across in this human experience. So on a soul level, on a divine level, every single one of us chooses the incarnation that we're going to experience here, which includes all of the hardships, all of the tragedies, all of the darkness and atrocities that a human being experiences in their lifetime, even down to who their parents are going to be, which is especially triggering. But I also want to tell you that I'm coming from a place of, I was someone whose father committed suicide when he was 16 years old. I go more into depth on that story in some of my other videos. But from that experience, I want to say that my level of empathy and compassion for people on the human level is actually very strong. So if ever I'm in a situation where in front of me is a person who is suffering from this difficult thing that has happened in their life, I'm not going to look at them and be like, hey, this is your fault. It's not helpful and it's not loving. When the suffering in my life got intense enough, that's when my true seeking began. I started dabbling in meditation and then eventually plant medicine. And some of the experiences and moments that I had during these plant medicine ceremonies were so liberating on a deep divine level that I started to have this knowing and understanding that we are only seeing one very small dimension as human beings. But there are many dimensions to you as a being. There's the human level, the divinity level, and it goes much deeper than you can possibly imagine. For a while, I thought I was crazy. Like I had this knowing within me, this peace. I was able to move and take action from a different energy. And the mind initially was like, oh bro, you took drugs, which now I don't call them that. I call them plant medicine because I realized something like mushrooms, ayahuasca, it comes directly from the earth and has been used for thousands of years. But then I started going down the rabbit hole of NDEs, near-death experiences. At this point, I feel like I have read hundreds of near-death experiences, and there are all these common threads that began to confirm what I already knew and what was revealed to me through these various plant medicine ceremonies. On a divine level, you chose to come here. You chose your parents, you chose the traumas and difficulties you were going to go through, because it is pain that ultimately leads us to our higher self, and that leads us to light. And until you know that, everything just feels like chaos. It just feels like you're a victim where all this bad shit is happening to you for no reason. And I used to be like this, especially once my dad killed himself when I was 16 years old. I was very deep in nihilism, very deep in fatalism. And then I also noticed religious people around me, even though they believed in a higher power, they were also involved in this form of subtle nihilism where it was like, nothing in this life matters. I only care about eternity. When I die, I'll go to heaven. So nothing here really matters. Money's evil. Good experiences are evil. It was like this subtle fatalistic viewpoint that came from their religion. So to summarize, on a human level, no, the atrocities, the things that happen to you are not your fault. You are living life and then seemingly all of a sudden these terrible things happen. But you do have the choice and the responsibility to view it through the lens of purpose, to view it through the lens of this is making me stronger, and to view it through the lens of I don't have to make this a tragic story. Every hero that you've ever heard of wouldn't be a hero without the darkness that they had been through. And so if you can reframe all the terrible things that might have happened to you, whether you were abused as a child, whether you were betrayed, whatever it is, if you can view it through the lens that these hardships are forging you into the hero that you are meant to be for humanity, for yourself, then it changes everything. Or you can be the bitter villain who just wants to make the world a worse place. And in turn, you cause other people to suffer while perpetuating your own suffering. And if that happens, even on a human level, it is absolutely your fault. And then back to the level of the divine, this goes much deeper than you can imagine, man. I would encourage you, if you're curious, to start reading near-death experiences. There are loads of them, and a lot of them, man, there's just inexplainable things. People floating above their bodies and then coming back, recalling conversations that doctors said like word for word, like this shit is real. And while I haven't had a near-death experience, I've had very, very deep plant medicine ceremonies, very high doses of mushrooms, ayahuasca, with the intention of knowing the truth. And that's where it begins. Being honest, asking the divine, saying, hey, I don't have all the answers, but I do want truth, whatever it is. Even if it makes my ego uncomfortable, even if it initially terrifies me, show me the truth. And so in that previous video, when I was saying everything was your fault, in a lot of ways I was saying your higher self chose the hardships that you've been through in order to increase the chances of your soul evolving to the version of yourself that you're meant to be right here and now. And I know that there's going to be a select few people where this really speaks to, and this is who I'm talking to. There was a point in my life where if I would have heard anybody talk about these things, I would just call them a fucking lunatic and I would just unsubscribe. And if that's you, you're more than welcome to do that. But I would encourage you to start asking these deeper questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Most of humanity is on the hamster wheel, just doing the rat race, trying to prove to themselves and the rest of the world that they're worthy, when your true essence has been love this whole time. One more thing I want to mention is there's the concept of the veil of forgetfulness. When we incarnate here as human beings, we literally forget everything on the soul level so we can have a true objective human experience. Because if we came here with all that knowledge to start out, we probably would just fuck around. Like, we wouldn't take any of this seriously. We wouldn't try to learn lessons. We wouldn't try to extract and understand the deeper meaning behind things. Most of humanity right now just needs to move from victimhood to self-empowerment. And that's just beginning to understand that your thoughts, your emotions isn't who you are. You are the awareness observing those things. The mind is here to just predict and protect, but the divine, your heart, which is the connection to the divine, is constantly calling you to something higher, to whatever it is that you need to experience to push you towards the evolution and growth of your soul, which ultimately is all that matters. Because money, success, women, those things are fine. You can enjoy them, but none of that shit matters without inner peace. So dig deeper, look within, ask deeper questions. Final thing I'll mention, I do offer coaching and mentoring. If that's something that you'd be interested in, fill out the form below. We can potentially hop on a discovery call and see if it'd be a good fit. You are loved, you matter, and you've barely scratched the surface of what you're capable of. I'll talk to you soon.